Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Chapter 41, verse 1. Yosef is in prison. Yosef's had the interesting story with the different ministers or aides to Paro and understanding their dreams. And in Vayihi Mikesh Nosayim Yamim, and it was after 2 years, Ufaro Cholem Vineo Made Alayor. And Paro was dreaming, and behold, in the dream, he's standing by the river. The famous story, Paro, he has 2 dreams, seemingly in quick succession, doesn't know what they mean, and he's all baffled, and he wants someone to explain the dream to him. Just a grammatic point. Should it have said Ufaro Cholem, Paro is dreaming, or should it have said Ufaro Cholam, Paro did dream? You would think the grammar of the pasuk would be Paro did dream. Paro had a dream. So it's an interesting Orach Chaim over here. It's the second Orach Chaim on the pasuk. Ufaro Cholem. Ne'letzachi tchilas hauda hayatzarach lomar cholam Paro or vayachalom Paro. It should have said something in the past tense. Paro, one form or another of Paro dreamt. Achein hakasuv musav el inyan rishon. The Orach Chaim says this pasuk is a continuation of a previous discussion. Shesipe b'parsha shekadma chalomo shesara mashkim leinyano hosef lomar ufaro gam kein cholem. So the last parsha ended off the story of the butler, and now we're saying 2 years later, Paro also was having a dream. The Orach Chaim's point is if this is the beginning of a story, it should be in the past tense. If this is in the middle of a story, the present tense actually makes sense. So he says this is the next part of the story of the dream of the butler is that Paro now has a dream. V'akavana bazeh, the intent of this is ki im tzara mashkim lo ratza lezochro al yedei chalomo asa Hashem shegam Paro yachalom. Do you know why Paro had a dream? The reason why Paro had a dream is because Yosef needs to get out of prison. And that's the reason why the butler had his dream. And it was supposed to be that the butler would come and right away get back into Paro's palace and tell him all about Yosef, and he forgot all about him. So now God has to come up with another means by which Yosef's going to get out of prison. So the new answer is Paro's going to have a dream. So the way to read the psukim is back from the end of the previous parsha, and the butler didn't remember Yosef. And so now Paro has a dream, and now the butler speaks up. That's a very interesting way to think about the pasuk, and so important. And again, it's always important, but I think in our times, all these kinds of messages of seeing the hand of God in our lives is so important, and to recognize that our sense of cause and effect is so off. We think we know why this happens and why that happens. It's not that Paro had a dream and that's why Yosef got out of prison. Yosef needed to get out of prison, and that's why Paro had a dream. Just it's an important way of how we think about things. Od afshar, shichavin lomar kishnosayim yom Paro cholem bitmidus chalom zeh. El shloya yodeh shecholam lusof shnosayim cholam v'lo shachach. The second shot, the Orach Chaim suggests, is really interesting. He says, you know why it says in the present tense? Because he suggests maybe for these past 2 years, Paro has regularly been having these dreams. Now, it's interesting because how in the world does that fit with the psukim? The psukim talk about now after 2 years, Paro has a dream. So he says maybe the pshat is that he's like been keeping on having these dreams, but when he got up, he didn't realize that he had the dreams. And now after 2 years, he does realize that. It's an interesting pshat. So the point is that this is like such a significant part of like Paro's psyche right now, or it's probably the absolute wrong term to use, but Paro, this is so significant to Paro. These dreams have been floating around in the back of his mind for 2 years. Just interesting pshat. Okay, moving on to verse 14. So we know the story. The butler tells Paro about the dreams. The butler tells Paro about Yosef because Paro's so frustrated. Nobody can explain his dreams in a way that Paro's satisfied. And so Paro's impressed. So verse 14. Vaishlach Paro vaikros Yosef. Paro sends, he calls for Yosef. Vayritzu min habor. They pull him out of the pit. Vaygalach vaychalef sim losav. Shaves. He changes his clothing. Vayavo el Paro. And he came to Paro. The word Vayritzu min habor is really interesting. Vayritzu min habor presumably is related to the language of Rutz, which is to run. They rushed him out of the jail. So, there's a famous idea that the reason why he shaves and changes his clothing is to teach the honor for the Malchus. Rashi brings this down, that we have to have derech eretz for whoever is in charge. What's the significance of saying he got rushed out of jail? I guess he got rushed out of jail. If I would have asked you, do you think it would have been a 3-week trip or not? What's the message here? And there's a beautiful sforno. I've shared this. I know I've shared this with you before, but I think this is amazing. Sforno pasuk yudalad vayritzu min habor kedera kol tzuas Hashem shenases kamo rega. God's salvation comes immediately. That's just the way the deal goes. That when God brings His salvation, it's out of nowhere. Ka'amro ki krova Yeshua si lavo. Pasuk in Yeshaya, God says, "My salvation is close and coming." Close and coming. I can't map this out. Right. That's the point. Whenever it comes, it's just going to come. It's waiting. It's just waiting to happen. That's the significance of how they got brought out of Egypt. They all of a sudden, it's like a year with the plagues. And all of a sudden, boom, Pharaoh says, "Get out of here. Just get out." The famous thing we say in the Haggadah. There was no time for the dough to rise. There's a pasuk like this in Malachi, that suddenly the Master will come to His abode to redeem us. And it's an amazing thing to think about, this image of waiting for the redemption, not only believing that the redemption can come and will come, but believing that any moment could be the moment, and it's just gonna come right away. An interesting thing to think about. Okay. By the way, even maybe people will correct me in my understanding of events, but even in more recent history, when the Jewish people got the Kotel, if for a person who wasn't privy to whatever the cabinet discussions were and the military discussions were, you knew they were doing well, but my impression was kind of out of left field. To an American listening on the radio or getting updates, it was totally out of left field. My guess is to Israelis as well. Just something to think about. Okay, we should have it in our days. Okay, Yosef comes into Paro. Yosef says a great pshat about the dreams and what it all means. And now, and again, the gist is that there's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And now Yosef does something really, really interesting. Yosef switches hats. Up until now, Yosef was the interpreter of the dreams. And now all of a sudden, Yosef has become, as is the way in our times, a pundit. He's now going to tell Paro what to do. Self-appointed. Paro didn't ask him what to do. Paro asked him what the dream means. Verse 33, V'yato yereh Paro ish navon v'chacham. Now Paro has to appoint an understanding and wise person, v'shiseu al eretz Mitzrayim, and put him over Egypt, and it's going to be his job to store up all this grain over these years, and he'll manage everything. Says the Ramban in Pasuk Lamed Gimel, Yereh Pharaoh ish navon v'chacham. Amar lo shitzarich lish navon v'chacham sheyeh memuna al kol haaretz. Yosef says to Paro, you need somebody who's really talented, really wise, who's going to be in charge of everything. The next pasuk is he says to him, and this person should stand over other representatives who are going to go around to collect grain throughout the land. It's not plausible, it's not feasible for this one person to be in charge of all collections. There need to be people working for him. What do the words even mean? It says you need someone who's understanding and wise. Meaning what in this context? Navon, Sheyeda l'nahel am eretz Mitzrayim belechem l'fiataf miyado v'loseis lohem k'dei chiyusam v'yimkar mosar la'rotzos acheres l'isuf osher mamon l'faro. You're going to need someone really understanding. He's going to need, on the one hand, to make sure to give enough grain to the people of Egypt to keep everybody going. On the other hand, he's going to need to have the understanding of what he can sell off to other lands to keep the assets of the royal coffers filled. So that requires a lot of understanding, but that's one word. The other word is chacham, wise. It's going to be complicated to make sure that the grain doesn't rot. So one navon is sort of more like understanding how to match up needs with assets and how to sell off assets. Wise is to make sure that what they have doesn't rot. You have to, you have to have the book knowledge, and that is what chacham implies. You have to know which things you can put with which types of grains to sustain them. Okay. Skipping a line or so. I'm sorry, skipping another line. Yosef calls that. Why did Yosef say all this? Why didn't he just interpret the dream and let Paro figure it out? So that Paro would appoint Yosef for the job. Ramban quotes the famous pasuk from Koheles: "A wise person has eyes in his head," meaning he looks ahead, he sees the future, he understands where things are going. I think this is a fascinating. It's just sort of tucked in at the end of the Ramban, but I think it's a fascinating thing to think about. Yosef has been through a remarkable roller coaster. This is something I think you see from Yosef left and right through his story. Yosef it's an interesting thing to think about from the perspective of Emunah. Yosef is always seeing whatever situation he finds himself in as being potentially God's solution to the next step. So this is remarkable that Yosef is called out of prison to interpret these dreams, and that he has the wisdom to understand how to explain the dreams, and that he sees this as a God-given gift. But he says to himself, this is not for nothing. God is giving me a chance here. There's no way I'm going back to prison from this if I can help it. But why shouldn't he send me back to prison? I need to create a purpose for myself here. So I'm going to push the envelope. And I'm going to say, well, my take on this dream is that you need somebody to do da 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 da, and I'm going to show him that I've got the vision for what he needs. And maybe, just maybe, he'll listen to what I say, and he'll say to himself, this is the man. And guess what? That is exactly what happened. B'diuk what happened. It's an interesting thing to think about. So we discussed Orach Chaim this morning about Paro dreaming. We discussed Sforno about Yosef being rushed out of jail. We discussed the Ramban about Yosef pushing the envelope.